Welcome back. September 30th will mark the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, taking the time to honor the lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families, as well as communities. That is an important step toward the process of reconciliation. And Breakfast Television and all of Rogers Sports and Media committed to raising awareness for truth and reconciliation.
That's right. We're covering important stories from Indigenous leaders, artists, and activists across the country throughout the week. Joining us this morning to talk about their experiences working at St. Michael's Indian Residential School in Alert Bay, BC, are Daniel Rubenstein and Nancy Dyson. A warning, some of the details we'll be talking about here, some may find disturbing. Daniel and Nancy, we really appreciate your time today. Good morning to the both of you. Nancy, I want to start with you. Take us back to how you first got involved, how both you got involved in residential schools. It was 1970. You were new to the country. Please pick up the story from there.
We wanted to stay in Canada for a while, and we needed jobs in order to get landed immigrant status. We noticed an ad for childcare workers at the Alert Bay Student Residence, formerly St. Michael's Indian Residential School. And we were flown up to Alert Bay, and we were hired on the spot. We had no experience with children, and no awareness of Indigenous history or culture. It was a bit of a shock.
Let's talk about that shock. Dan, for you, what did you see on day one?
We saw the matron said, "You've got to come with me," and she took us and 4 children that had been brought in by the Indian agents, and she took us downstairs to the basement, and she stood the children, these 4 trembling, beautiful children, up in front of this blazing furnace. And she took out her scissors and she stripped the clothes. She cut the clothes off the children. She cut their hair. They're standing there trembling. She throws the clothes in the fire, in that burning mass. And then they shower the kids with this terrible soap, terrible stuff. And I challenged her. I said, why are you doing this? What are you doing? What is happening here? And the matron looked at me and she said, "It's lice. They all bring lice." And the children were just there trembling. This was their introduction to the school. This was their forcibly being removed from their parents.
Wow. Nancy, take us further inside what you saw here. The general conditions of this residential school were what?
Well, we were concerned about the forcible removal of the children from their families. There was also a lot of harsh discipline for even minor offenses. There wasn't much joy in this school. Students were violent against one another. Children exposed to violence, children who are victims of violence become violent. There was a suppression of Indian language and culture. Children weren't allowed to draw in the traditional way. They weren't allowed to speak their own languages. We didn't see records about the children. We didn't have educational records or medical records or information about where the children were from, what language did they speak, what was their family. There was poor nutrition, inadequate staffing. But the main thing was the frequent and harsh punishment and the lack of connection between the children and their families and communities. And looking back, we think those children, they didn't know who they could trust, where they could turn.
And Dan, for you and Nancy, you wanted to be those people they could trust and could turn to, so you decided to take action. Can you take us through that process and what you did in speaking up?
Well, we would challenge the administrator when something would happen, when there would be discipline and challenge him on that. And he said, well, Indian kids are tough. All they understand is discipline, which we didn't believe. We reached out to the community because we were just newcomers to Canada. We had no idea what this thing was, this residential school. And we found a United minister who was really a decent guy and who'd worked with the community, and he was starting a petition to the government had just taken over all the residential schools in 1969, and the minister wanted the government to inspect what they'd taken over and see the conditions firsthand. And we went around with the minister to local local families and tried to explain what we were seeing.
And we were successful, we think, or perhaps it was a routine visit. In December, 4 months after we'd started, there was a delegation of 3 men from the Department of Indian Affairs. And on the second day, they asked to meet with staff, and they asked if anyone had concerns. And Dan had a long list. He pulled out of his pocket and he read them. The other staff were silent. And at the end of that list of concerns, which I mentioned earlier this morning, he said, "This school is an instrument of cultural genocide." And the next day, the administrator called Dan to the office and fired him. And he was kind but very definite about the fact that it was a very bad fit between us and the school. And we had to agree with him on that. In many ways, we were relieved to leave the school and leave the island.
Again,
I believed.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan, please.
Go ahead.
I believe that it was an instrument of cultural genocide then. I believe it now, over 50 years later. There was no mistaking that's what it was. This forced separation from the children with their parents was a deliberate attempt to remove their culture.
As we've seen in a lot of other instances around the world, the longer time draws out, the more importance there is in the eyewitness, in people who were there. And as we approach the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation on Thursday of this week, stories and eyewitness accounts such as yours are incredibly important. We want to thank you both, Daniel and Nancy, for doing this today. I know it's difficult to talk about, but it's crucial that we hear these stories again. Thank you very much. God bless.
You.
I would just like to add, our book is called St. Michael's Residential School, Lament and Legacy. And the royalties and honorariums for speaking, we are donating to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. We did not want to make any profit on other people's tragedy, and we really want to support Indigenous people. Thank you.
Appreciate you mentioning that, and we'll get that all on our website. Thank you, Dan, Nancy, for sharing your story. And we will continue to share these stories throughout the week. And sadly, a lot of them are very similar, Sid.
Yeah, unfortunately. So to echo Mel's sentiments were, again, this will be a talking point all week, as it should be. More BT coming up after this.